I'm well aware this is not a very exciting or even demanded iPhone that people want. There's a ton of iPhone SE fans out there that a lot of people are hoping Apple would update or refresh and make more modern. We've seen dozens of concepts of Apple making a new, refreshed version of the SE, but I think if you take a step back and look at the iPhone SE for what it was at the time of its launch, then today's report that I'm going to detail, it may make a little bit more sense. Here's the iPhone SE nobody wants, but likely will be the one we get. Let's begin. There's a supply chain report from Economic News Daily, which they're predicting something that is far, far away, so this could end up being entirely false. We don't have huge amounts of analysts or rumors backing this up. However, when I read this report, I thought it made a whole lot of sense for Apple's lineup. They're saying that in March of 2020, which also happened to be the month the iPhone SE originally launched in back in 2016, Apple will be releasing a 4.7-inch iPhone that takes on the characteristics and the aesthetics basically of the already existent iPhone 8. Why would they be releasing a 4.7-inch iPhone 8 in March of 2020? Well, take a step back and look at what the iPhone SE launched in back in March. It was just a few months after Apple had launched the iPhone 6s, which meant the year before they launched the iPhone 6, and the year before that they launched the iPhone 5s. And instead of just abandoning the 5s form factor entirely, they decided they wanted to keep around the 5s form factor, keep utilizing those factories that were producing all of the parts for the iPhone 5s and quickly and cheaply retrofit them to support the iPhone SE. As we all know, the SE and the 5s are very aesthetically similar. There's a few small differences that a trained eye can spot, but for the most part, they really just swapped out the CPU, gave the SE a little bit more RAM so that it was up to date with the iPhone 6s in terms of specs, but in regards to traditional design, it was easily transformed over from the 5s factory lines that they already had a huge infrastructure for. Now place yourself in 2020. 4 years later, maybe Apple wants to make a more lower cost, not so beautiful, filled with features iPhone, but just one that perhaps is assembled in India, and maybe its main goal is to just get iOS and Apple's longevity that they care about into as many pockets as possible, so they're not worried about Face ID, they're not worried about OLED, they're just trying to make a cheaper, more affordable iPhone. That means that if you consider in 2019, we're going to be getting, of course, the new iPhone 11, 11 Max, and the 11R, or whatever stupid name Apple decides to go with. A few months after that, that means the iPhone 8 will be hitting its 2-year birthday mark, just like the iPhone 5s was hitting its 2-year birthday mark right when the 6s dropped. And then a few months go by, then they re-released the 5s under different branding, call it the SE, but it has the latest CPU and beefed up RAM, but design-wise it looks very, very similar to that older design scheme. If you read this report with the iPhone 8 in mind, this makes complete sense given what Apple did in the past with the SE, as in when a lot of us think of iPhone SE, we all think, oh, that is a 4-inch iPhone, oh, that's a boxy design, oh, it looks like the 5s, and it still has the headphone jack or something like that. But in actuality, what the iPhone SE was taking an at the time older design and updating the specifications. That's what Apple would be doing in 2020 if this supposed iPhone 8 refresh ends up being real. It would be just over its 2-year birthday mark. They'd be retrofitting the iPhone 8 production lines just a little differently now. So now they equip the latest CPU. So imagine your iPhone 8, except now it has an A13 Omega chip or whatever name they decide to go with. So it's just as fast as the recently released iPhone 11. And perhaps even they update the camera. They did, after all, update the camera in the SE from the 5s, allowing it to support 4K. Perhaps with the updated 2020 iPhone SE, perhaps they'll give it the same camera that the iPhone XR had, and it will have portrait mode features even though there's only one lens on the back. What colors they'll launch it in, I'm not sure. What other cost-saving measures they might take, they don't go into a whole lot of detail. But once I read this report, I thought it was such an interesting and different perspective. Not necessarily that I think this is a great idea. It might end up costing $600 or $550 at the end of the day, which for a lot of people comparing that to Android smartphones, they're still gonna say, nah, even an old traditional iPhone 8 design, that's not very good. Or how come Apple would keep around the home button and Touch ID in 2020? Well, keep in mind, it wasn't too long ago, they just updated the iPad mini and the iPad Air, both with headphone jacks, home buttons, and Touch ID. So it's really not too out there of an idea that in the year of 2020 that Apple would release a phone with a home button and Touch ID, but a really, really good CPU, meaning that anyone who bought the 2020 version of the iPhone SE will probably get iOS updates for many, many years down the road for those people who maybe they don't care if phones have bezels, or maybe they prefer Touch ID, or maybe they prefer that smaller 4.7-inch form factor. Hopefully, this 2020 version of the SE could have a good battery life, better than that of the iPhone 8, but that CPU chip definitely will ensure it gets longevity. It will allow Apple services to be available to more people, and they won't have to compromise on the CPU being too weak or anything like that, or the GPU power not being able to handle things like Apple Arcade, which they're trying to push so heavily. So this is not a heavily reported on leak, but one that once I read, I immediately thought to myself, you know what? That's not what everyone's expecting when it comes to the next gen iPhone SE. So that almost makes me think it's more likely, because that's not the approach everyone's thinking. When the iPhone SE dropped, it wasn't like they were redesigning an iPhone. They were just recycling the old factory lines and form factors that they already had in place for the iPhone 5S. So why would they go out of their way to design a brand new iPhone from the ground up and give it flagship treatment if they're specifically going to end up catering it towards more budget markets? That's not really what Apple does. If this was OnePlus, it would be a different discussion, a company that focuses on making more affordable budget phones. Apple's not about that, but the iPhone SE was around to keep support for people who wanted the old traditional designs but still wanted the good speed and were not interested in paying top dollar for iPhones. And of course, that 2020 version of the iPhone SE would slowly get cheaper over time, which means in 2021, maybe it'll be $400 or $500 or something way more affordable, and still probably give you a CPU that's way faster than anything Android will offer at the time. Now, before you all hate me for this, understand this isn't what I want to happen. I don't think this is a great idea, and I also don't think that many people would find the 2020 SE a good phone. They would find it okay. They would be like, I mean, the CPU's good, but the design is traditional, but I wanted Face ID, I wanted the bezel-less design, and I wanted it to look like the last generation SE. But if you take a look at what Apple did with the SE from just a little bit of a different perspective, these radical redesigned versions of the iPhone 5 really don't make much sense for Apple to keep alive in 2020. But recycling the old iPhone 8 factory lines so that they can give them updated CPUs at a lower cost, maybe market them in countries like India, I could more likely see that happening. So not exciting, but more likely in my opinion. What do you guys think of this 2020 iPhone SE idea? Let me know what you're thinking about by following me over on Twitter or checking out our Discord. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.